everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Mathenic 101. This is Angela Pelagio.
And this is Sophia, Canapi.
And today, we are going to report various concepts about constructing and interpreting contingency tables.
We will also present the proper procedure for constructing a contingency table and interpretations of cross-tabulations.
Yes, and let's get started right off the bat. First of all, we have to know, why do we need to tabulate data? Sophia, umuulan ba dyan sa inyo?
Oo kahapon pa nga. Parang medyo makulimlim.
Tapos biglang araw, no?
Oo, feeling ko may relationship kung bakit umuulan ng malakas siya kung bakit makulimlim. Tingin mo ba?
Feel ko rin eh. Alam mo, tamang-tama yung topic natin today. Because the goal of tabulating data is that we can interpret data easier, which can facilitate calculating probabilities. So, hindi lang yung assume ka ng assume.
Moving on, we will now proceed to the definition of the contingency table. According to circa 2011, a contingency table, or also known as a cross-tabulation, or simply table, depicts a relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable, where each variable is a group data format and generally nominal or ordinal level of measurement.
So, is it somewhat a matrix or a tool in data analysis?
Precisely. It is one of the numerous ways of presenting the relationship between data, which may be dependent or an independent variable.
And just to recap about the concepts of dependent and independent variable. The dependent variable is the variable that is being caused or explained, while the independent variable is the variable influencing the dependent variable. In simpler terms, the dependent variable is the causer, and the latter is the causee. Diba, Sophia?
That's right. And based on an example given by Surkin, we are presented data from the Economist Pocket World in Figures in 2004 and the Freedom in the World in 2003. In a sample of 20 countries. Here, let us examine the relationship between two variables, which are the per capita gross domestic product and the political rights.
So gamitin natin yung example ni Surkin in analyzing the different steps of constructing a cross-tabulation. For the first step, we have to identify the dependent and independent variables. Ano kaya guys yung dependent tsaka independent variables? In the example given. Tama! The IV, or the independent variable, is the GDP per capita, while the DV is the political rights. Okay guys, so yun na yun. Tapos na tayo. Job well done. Yeah, moving on to step 2, regrouping variables using frequency distribution. So here, we are answering the question, what if the data is not grouped? Well, there are two approaches we can use. The first being, check for any external standard in use. In this example, you can use the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations as references in making your ordinal data. If there is none, then group the data based on your own preference and priorities. You can do this by following a class interval frequency table. Here, in the examples given, there is a range identified, which is the lower and upper limits of a given category.
Following that, we can already do a frequency distribution of scores and examine that distribution. Here, we will set two objectives. The first objective will be reducing the number of class intervals to a manageable number. Ideally, we can set 3 to 4 categories. In this example, we have 4. We have high, medium, low, and very low. Second will be having in each category at least a few cases and, if possible, a roughly equal number of cases in each class interval. The next step will be constructing a table. Generally, the categories of independent variables are placed in columns, and the categories of dependent variables are placed in tables rows. Once we laid out the table, we examine each country, go to the column of the table within which the country's GDP per capita falls, and go down to the column to the row within which that country's political rights score can be found. In the cell where the appropriate column and appropriate row intersect, we put a tally mark. We will then replace the tally marks in each cell with the sum of the total tally marks and put in marginal totals and the grand total.
Here's a tip, guys. In using Microsoft Excel, you can simply use sums function and get the total of your values. Of course, there are more complicated combinations in the ranges of sum functions, but this is the most basic one.
Thank you for that tip, Angela.
You're welcome.
For the next step, we will be generating percentages. We have to remember that percent means per 100, and in this case, we can set a common denominator or the same overall size. There are three ways to base our percentages. For the first one, we can treat each entry as a percentage of the grand total. For example, in the high cell entry, there is number 7, and we can divide it to the grand total of 20. So 7 divided by 20 would be 0.35, and if we calculate it to percentage, it would be 35%. If we get the percentage similarly for each of the 16 cells, we would garner up to 100%. The second way to base our percentages would be to treat each cell entry as a percentage of its row total. From the term itself, we will get the percentage of the high cell to the total of 12 countries, which is its row. So 7 divided by 12 would be 0.5833, and we will change it to percentage, which will be 58.33. And if we will get all of the percentage of that row, we will garner up to 100%. The third one will be we will treat each cell entry as a percentage of its column total. For the high entry, we have 7, and if we divided it into its column, which is also 7, and we will have a total of 100%. We should note that we should change the table from frequencies to percentages before interpreting. In this manner, trends can be easily observed, and the comparisons and or relationships across different categories are easy to make. In naming the title, we should first identify the dependent variable, and then it should be followed by a comma and the word by, and then name the independent variable. We could also include some additional information such as the year and the location of the study. In this example, we have the title of the table, which is Political Rights by Per Capita GDP.
And in the final step, we will be interpreting the table. We interpret our table by examining increases or decreases in percentages of the dependent variable as we move from one category of the independent variable to the other. Here, a positive relationship will be indicated by a clustering on the main diagonal, from upper left to lower right. An inverse relationship, on the other hand, will be indicated by clustering on the off diagonal, from the lower left to the upper right. So far, we've been discussing about the relationship between two variables, the independent variable and the dependent variable. But what if we apply a third variable, which is commonly known as a control variable? When applying a third variable or a control variable, a spurious relationship may occur. This is the relationship between two variables that is the product of a common independent variable. Here, two general outcomes may occur. The first being, the control variable has no impact on the initial relationship. The second, The presence of the control variable changes the initial relationship necessary for there to be a relationship between the independent and dependent variables. We could illustrate these outcomes by using partial tables or separate tables for illustrating each variable. The findings in the partial tables are combined with other assumptions to produce causal models of these relationships. Causal models are schematic diagrams showing the independent variable, dependent variable, and control variable, and where appropriate, positing the flow causation of change in the dependent variable. Some examples of these models are as follows. I and C are concurrent, meaning they could occur at the same time or simultaneously. C is antecedent to I. C is intervening. C is subsequent to D. C is irrelevant to I. C is irrelevant to the ID relationship. I is antecedent to both C and D. C is both antecedent to current with I. I is both antecedent to and concurrent with C. And I is both antecedent to and concurrent with D. Here are some computer applications that could help with making cross tabulations. One is SPSS, or the Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, a set of statistical computer routines. SAS, or the Statistical Analysis System, a set of statistical computer routines and a programming language. Microsoft Excel, use of Microsoft Spreadsheet program for statistical analysis. And Microsoft Windows, a widely used operating system for Windows.
And that's it for constructing and interpreting contingency tables.
We thank you for listening and we hope that you learned a lot from us. And this is Pelagio.
And this is Sophia Canapi from Mathematic 101.